Welcome to a camera comparison rematch. I've got the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra up against the Oppo Find X7 Ultra and the Vivo X100 Pro. So these phones have had some substantial updates, especially to the camera software and optimization. This is why I am doing a rematch to see if it's going to be a lot closer to the Vivo X100. So front-facing cameras here, 4K 60. There is a little bit of wind, so we may hear some wind noise. Which here has the best stabilization and microphones too as I swap over audio sources. Still keeping with 4K 60 frames per second, these are our ultra wide cameras. As I pan around, it should look smooth. There should be no jitter coming through. Hard, difficult conditions with the sun straight ahead, but that's a good test of what these are capable of, the cameras. So as I mentioned, we've got the latest firmware on all of these. Now I'm using default settings, so no pro mode, no raw or anything like that with the photos. It's to keep everything on an even level and to see what they're like out of the box, because if I did edit raw photos, I could easily enter with a little bit of bias and edit one slightly better than the other. So that's why I use out of the box settings. Main cameras now. So we've got 250 megapixel 1-inch type sensors versus a 200 megapixel sensor with the Samsung. Take it up to now their optical max, so 5 times with the Samsung, 6 times with the Oppo, 4.3 with the Vivo X100 Pro. And I'll try and look at the same point, but it's a little difficult because they're in slightly different positions, these cameras, even though I've got them in the same mount. Stability has improved definitely with the Find X7 Ultra that had issues with the camera being really shaky, but they fixed that with the second to last firmware update. And now applying some digital zoom here. Take it up to 10 times with the Samsung and 10 times now with the Oppo and 10 times with the Vivo. Trying to focus on that same little rock out there, but it is difficult for me to do this. There we go, I think I got it in the shot now. So which one do you think is the best, the steadiest when it comes to zoom footage? Back to those main cameras now. I want to test out a last test, which is stability, optical and electronic image stabilization. Short jog up these steps here. To see which one, of course, is the steadiest. Low light performance now. This is 4K 30 frames per second. At 60 it does not look as good. I think 4K 30 is more suited for low light video. And as I pan around, we're going to see dropped frames. So looking at the screens at the time of shooting this, I can see a bit of a clear difference. Definitely in the white balance, looking a little bit more orange on the X100 Pro versus the Oppo and the Samsung. Now the lights should look a little bit orange. That's the color of them that I'm looking at right now, and not white. Over to stills now. So this shot of my cat Vera, she loves to roll in the dirt, so her white fur isn't actually a brilliant white, which is more reflected with the Vivo. The more correct white balance is with the X7 Ultra, the different shades of brown, but also the details you get out of that, looking very good from the 50 megapixel main camera, 1-inch type sensor. You can see the little bits of dirt there, the pollen, everything. The best shot is definitely, I think, the Oppo with this. Macro photos, so of bright flowers. The Samsung does really well since the recent firmware updates. They've toned down on the brightness and the saturation. The more oversaturated looks like the Oppo here, a little bit too red, a lot of clipping going on. Least amount of clipping on the reds is the Samsung, and the Vivo has the most details. It did get that focus just a little better, and I locked in the same position with all three phones. The Vivo looks almost over sharpened, the Samsung a little bit. But I tend to lean towards the Samsung with this photo, but then you can't sort of deny just how clear that Vivo comes out as well. So it's the Vivo first, Samsung second, Oppo third for macro. Rear main camera portrait, so all three of them do handle skin tones, background blur, and stitching a little different. You can see skin tones, it's all down to personal preference, of course, that I think a lot of people would probably like the Samsung because it's a little warmer. The Find X7 Ultra, a little on the lighter side, as so is the Vivo. Now, the Vivo stitching on the left side of my daughter's hair
doesn't look as good as the Samsung. I think the Samsung got the best stitching here. Background blur probably looks the most pleasant on the Samsung too as well, although it's not bad on the Oppo or the Vivo. And the Vivo looks a little sharpened and maybe a little bit of skin smoothing happening too. It's still a very good shot. All three of them look excellent for a main camera portrait shot. But I'm going to go with here, I think the Samsung pulls ahead with the better stitching and slightly better, more realistic looking background blur compared to the Vivo, which looks kind of a little bit cut out, a bit too sharp the edges. However, if you're going to be taking a lot of portrait shots, I would go with the zoom cameras. You want to try and get like a 35mm or 50mm equivalent zoom with your phone, with the cameras, and you can see here I use optical zoom max, in fact, with all of these ones here. I didn't want any digital zoom, so we can judge and see which one looks the best. Different processing of the skin tones, colors slightly different. What is more true to life is the Oppo. Then the second would be the Vivo. The white balance is just a bit off with the Samsung. I don't really like the skin tones here, seem a little bit too warm. A little bit contrasty, the Oppo, but it gives it a little bit more mood. And notice that the Vivo stitching again on the left side of my daughter's here, it is just a little artificial looking. I don't like the way that it's cut out and sort of stitched in there. And they're doing something to her eyes, which a lot of people will like, but it looks like Vivo has brightened her eyes up a bit, and skin tones are certainly a little bit brighter than true to life. I think overall here that it is the Oppo that has the more pleasant zoom portrait photos. This is where we're seeing a big change when it comes to the recent firmware updates from Samsung have improved things. So the white balance of the Oppo is off. It's just a little too light. There's some skin kind of whitening going on there. The stitching with the Vivo is the best. The more correct colors are the Vivo. This is using their Zeiss natural preset here, and they're working, of course, with Zeiss with the white balance, color science, and everything. And it does show. It's looking very good there, the shot. The Samsung's a little on the warm side as well. Some people may like this, and it's very easy to correct or fix this. You could say that all three of them are fairly decent. They haven't completely overblown the background. The best overall HDR exposure here is the Oppo, but it's that white balance that's not quite right. So if I got to pick a winner here, it's between the Vivo and the Samsung. I think just here that the Vivo has the more pleasant selfie portraits. Of course, this is all subjective, remember. Ultra wide photos. So the white balance that goes to the Vivo, again using Zeiss Natural. That's what it pretty much looked like. You can see that the Samsung and the Oppo, they are oversaturating a little. Now, when you focus on the details, this is where the megapixel count does come into play, I feel. The Samsung has the least, the fewest megapixels. It's only 12, okay? And the others have 50. So when you look at the sky, especially those clouds, there should be more detail. You see this with the Oppo the most. Second would be the Vivo, and there's details, a little bit of over sharpening happening with the Samsung too that I don't like. They like to sharpen up their photos. Great for social media, don't get me wrong, they're ready to use straight away, look amazing. But if you want the extra detail and the sharpness there without being over sharpened, I think the Ultra, X7 Ultra took it here with the ultra wide photos, if a little oversaturated. This is also true when you take a look at our main cameras now. So 200 megapixels versus the two other 50 megapixel but 1-inch type sensors. It is again the Oppo that grabs those extra details in the clouds. You can see the different shades and it looks a little bit sharper but without being over sharpened, but more just that resolution and detail gathering and a good balance there with the HDR and exposure and everything. A little oversaturated, but I think main camera, the Oppo gets it. Optical zoom cameras now at their optical zoom maximum. So that is the 5 times, 6 times with the Oppo and 4.3 with the Vivo. The Vivo, yet again, anytime in the daylight when you use the Zeiss Natural profile, it just nails it when it comes to the colors looking as natural as possible, true to life. That's how it really looked. So very good colors. However, I like, again, the Oppo. I think the Oppo has got a good blend with the contrast, the details that are captured there, what we can see, and it just grabs some extra things in there that I do like. I think it is the best, and of course it does have a 1 times advantage with its zoom being optical. It's 6 times versus 5 and then 4.3. It certainly helps for shots like this. And then I took it up to 30 times digital zoom. Honestly, I wouldn't really go over this myself. I think over 30, even over 20 is not really that usable. But for social media, it's fine, of course, for that. You can see that all three of them look good at first glance. There is a difference in the details that are captured and especially the sharpness. The Vivo looks like it's been over-sharpened a little bit here. They've tweaked that, but at the same time, it looks like it's captured more details. But don't get confused with sharpness being or equaling more detail, because it's not always the case. Look at the vegetation, it's washed out with the Samsung. It looks a little blurry. There's a lot of color fringing going on between the contrast of the blues and the whites against the grays of this tower here made out of stone. And that puts the Samsung in third place for zoom cameras. I think it's very close between the Oppo and the Vivo, but because of the over sharpening here, and again a bit of fringing and the contrast between the blue and the sky, the way it looks, I give this win here for zoom cameras to the Oppo, close second being the Vivo, and of course white balance again, yeah, the Vivo got it, of course. Back to those main cameras again. So the Samsung, this is where I can happily say that they've done a good job, Samsung, to improve things, because 2 patches ago, it would not look like this. They were falling well behind, but here you can see very close. All three of them, you could say, look almost identical. They're really on the same kind of level. You have to start nitpicking, focusing on details, white balance, things like that, that most people wouldn't even probably bother about. So the Vivo, again, the white balance, got it. The Oppo, details are looking good. The HDR, of course, this is testing out HDR with the sun almost right in front of me. Very good across all three of them. They're good at getting those details in the shadows. The Samsung did really well, just looks a little warm. The Oppo probably here takes the lead, although I do quite like that Vivo shot, and because the colors are more correct, I think that has to be the winner with this round. Optical zoom maximums now against the sun here, looking at this cliff face, that they are looking good, but you can see there's one that looks a lot different to the others, and that is the Oppo. The Oppo is a little bit darker than what I really saw here. It should be a bit brighter, but it did capture those clouds more realistically. I guess it was the auto exposure maybe failed to capture this whole HDR scene here. And I think it's the Vivo, again, that seems to be the better shot here, even though it has the lower optical zoom of 4.3 times versus the 5 and the 6. It just seems to be a good balance of everything that it's captured with this zoom shot. And it did also have the best shutter rate too. There was no shutter lag with our zoom camera. This shot is really good to try and get that contrast between the bright windows and then the darker rear of this particular room here. So it's a good test of our HDR. And at first glance, they're all looking very good. Colors with the Vivo, again, more correct. I'm just like a parrot repeating myself here. And the Samsung looks good, but crop in. This is when you see that, oh dear, Samsung has a bit of a battle on their hands with that very noisy 200 megapixel sensor, which I believe is quite noisy. So they didn't really go overboard with noise reduction. And of course, they'll probably be using a bit of noise reduction, Vivo and Oppo too. Now, the Oppo has a little bit of noise to it, and I just think it's the Vivo here that pulled through with a slightly better shot, capturing the rear of that fireplace just a little bit better there, least amount of noise, and the more correct colors. So with this shot here, I was trying to capture the mood of the scene here with the colors, the warmth of everything, and just the general exposure of this light. That was my focal point. Now, the light has been captured the best, definitely with the Vivo. I think it's leagues ahead of the other two. It does have the Zeiss T-Star coating, and I really do think this helps to cut down any glares and reflections that could possibly come through with the lens and everything. And not only that, the colors again. Yes, it's a warm color. They use a lot of warm yellow lights here in Europe, and it's definitely noticeable. The Vivo just seems to be the champ here of these kind of scenes. The Oppo, a little bit overexposed. The Samsung's good, but it just can't match that Vivo. Then with this particular scene, I wanted to try to capture the night sky with the moon. Now, it was quite hazy, so that will explain some of that haziness to the sky. However, it should look more black like it does with the Oppo. But then the Vivo got the warm lights that I just talked about. So the white balance again, that Zeiss profile, probably mentioned it 5 times. It's really good. It's the best I've ever seen with a phone of trying to get true to life colors. The Samsung, it's got a bit of a warm balance to it. A little bit too cool with the Oppo, but the sky is good. So it's kind of a bit of a draw here between them all. I would say, it's the Vivo, though, however, if they have to choose one, which I will. low light photography now. So the zoom cameras, I set them to 10 times, and they are zoom cameras. So they don't have an aperture that is really for low light at all. So what they do to compensate is they bump up the ISO, and that's clear with these, with a little bit of noise coming in to play. The Oppo is the worst. It just was not so steady. That 6 times camera still has issues with the stability, I do find. Second is the Samsung, not a bad shot at all, and the Vivo pulled ahead with low light zoom. So with this particular last low light photo, this is where the Samsung is clearly a little bit too bright, too much exposure, bit of noise coming in, white balance is off, I could really start to pick it to bits. The Vivo's looking good. However, when I took this photo, it was actually like the Oppo. This was more true to life. So the Vivo's not always 100% in capturing that. I just think they didn't quite get the exposure right, white balance off a tiny little bit here, but it really was just like what the Oppo captured here. But in general, normally the Vivo would win, but sometimes, like this shot, it's the Oppo. So here are my findings. In general, I find that portrait photos went to Oppo. It had the more pleasant looking photos, best stitching of the 3. The Oppo also, I think, had the best video quality, but the audio quality microphones, that was certainly Samsung. Vivo, terrible microphones. I don't know what they're doing. They need to improve those microphones. Now, Vivo had the best low light performance. In general, not all the time. It would sometimes go to the Oppo, as I showed you. Low light video, that was the Vivo. Zoom shots, still think it's the Vivo that has a slight edge, although sometimes the Oppo can better it, having more optical zoom at 6 times. That's really good. That's a lot of zoom range that we do have. And HDR photos, indoors, again, that would be the Vivo. Samsung, while they've really improved things compared to what I saw with the first 2 firmware updates, we're now on the 4th, I believe it is, or 3rd or 4th. They've picked things up, but they've still got a bit of a way to go, especially when it comes to noise and a little bit of over-sharpening and things. So do you agree with my findings here with this camera comparison? If you do or didn't, just let me know in the comments. And thank you so much for watching this video. Do give a thumbs up if you liked it, because these videos are a lot of work, and nowadays YouTube's trying to just push me out of the algorithm completely, which is sad but true.